Everyone thinks the Romans ate garum because they had no choice, because it masked spoiled meat and made the poor tolerable. They're wrong. The standard story goes like this. Garum was born from necessity: fish scraps, salt, time. The poor needed protein, the wealthy needed seasoning. Everyone won. It's a neat explanation. It fits the arc of how we like to think ancient people solved problems. But the reality of garum production reveals something far more deliberate, far more profitable, and far more revolting than simple desperation. Garum arrived in Rome around the 4th century BCE, not as a peasant discovery, as an import from Carthage in the eastern Mediterranean, a luxury good. The wealthy bought it, the wealthy served it, the wealthy built fortunes on it. By the 1st century CE, garum production had become one of the most valuable industries in the empire. Factories operated in Spain, North Africa, and coastal Italy. They employed hundreds. They shipped their product across continents. This wasn't subsistence. This was commerce. The accepted version claims garum was made from fish scraps, bones, heads, entrails. What couldn't be sold for food. This made sense economically, waste into wealth. But archaeological evidence tells a different story. Garum makers used whole fish, expensive fish, mackerel, anchovy, mullet. They chose specific species for specific seasons. They weren't salvaging leftovers. They were sourcing premium raw material. The production process itself reveals the economics. Fish and salt went into large ceramic vats. The mixture sat in the sun for months, sometimes a year. The salt drew moisture from the flesh. Enzymes broke down the protein into amino acids. What emerged was a liquid, amber, viscous, pungent. But this process was controlled. It was deliberate. Factory managers knew exactly what they were doing. The stench was legendary. Ancient writers complained about it. Pliny the Elder noted the smell could drive a man from his home. Seneca described it as unbearable, but they still bought it, still used it, still paid premium prices. Why? Because the smell meant money. Factories were built outside cities, downwind, in areas where land was cheap and labor was cheaper. The worse the smell, the farther from civilization. The cheaper the operation. Garum wasn't for the poor. Price records from Pompeii show it cost roughly what a skilled worker earned in a day. A single amphora, about 26 liters, represented significant wealth. The poor ate salted fish. They ate pickled vegetables. They didn't eat garum. Garum was for those who could afford it, for those who wanted to display their taste, their connections, their money. The wealthy used garum differently than the story suggests, not to mask decay, to enhance flavor. A few drops in a sauce, a splash in wine, mixed into expensive dishes. It contained glutamates, the same compounds that make umami. Modern science confirms what ancient Romans intuited. Garum made food taste richer, deeper, more satisfying. It was an amplifier for luxury. Factory owners understood their market. They graded their product. Best quality, called garum optimum, came from the first pressing, the purest liquid. It sold for top prices. Lower grades went to middle-class consumers. The dregs, called alec, went to slaves and soldiers. Same production, different tiers, different prices. Every segment of society was monetized. The supply chain was sophisticated. Garum was transported in sealed amphorae, marked with the maker's name, the year, the grade. Some amphorae have been recovered with labels intact. They traveled via ship to Rome, to Britain, to Egypt. A single factory might produce thousands of amphorae per year. The logistics required organization, capital, and networks that rivaled modern supply chains. Wealthy Romans didn't just consume garum, they invested in it. Archaeological evidence shows that wealthy families owned garum factories or held shares in them. It was a commodity like olive oil or wine. Predictable returns, consistent demand, easy to transport, easy to store. Perfect for wealth accumulation. The real explanation for garum's dominance is simpler than necessity. It's simpler than taste. It's profit. Garum factories made money because they scaled production, controlled supply, and created demand. They advertised. They built brand loyalty. Some producers' names appear on amphorae across the empire. They were celebrities. They were entrepreneurs. They understood marketing. The garum industry collapsed not because of the smell or the taste, but because of Rome itself. When the empire fell, the networks that moved garum disappeared. Factories closed. Trade routes fractured. By the medieval period, garum was forgotten. The knowledge of production died with the factory workers. What survived was the stench, the one thing that lived in people's memories long after the product vanished. What Garum reveals is that ancient Rome wasn't so different from modern capitalism. Find a product people want, scale production, create supply chains, build brands, extract profit. The Romans did it with fermented fish. We do it with algorithms and smartphones. The mechanics are identical. The smell is just different. Garum teaches us something else. The stories we tell about the past often serve the present. We prefer narratives of necessity over narratives of greed. We like thinking the poor invented garum out of desperation. It's more romantic. It's more forgiving. But the evidence says otherwise. Garum was built by people with capital, sold to people with wealth, and abandoned when the money stopped flowing. The stench of garum wasn't a byproduct. It was a feature. It kept the poor away from the factories. It kept the poor away from the profit. The wealthy could afford to live far enough away that they never smelled it. They just tasted the result. They just paid the price. That distance, between the stench and the taste, between production and consumption, that's where the real business happened. Today we don't have garum, but we have its descendants. Products built on scale, marketed to status, and produced far from the people who consume them. The stench is still there. We just don't smell it. We outsource the smell. We outsource the guilt. The Roman garum factory was honest in one way. It made the cost visible. You could smell what you were buying. The next time you read about ancient Rome, ask yourself, whose story is being told? Who benefited? Who paid the price? Garum is just one answer, but it's an answer that echoes through 2,000 years. It's a reminder that profit is ancient, that scale is ancient, that the distance between the maker and the consumer is ancient, and that sometimes the stench tells you more than the taste ever could. Subscribe for more stories of how ordinary people built the systems that shaped empires, the ones history usually forgets to tell.